Hi guys, and welcome back for another JRDM video. And yes, I have started abbreviating because JR Digital Media is a bit of a mouthful. This week we're looking at all things slow-mo. I should really be calling it a high-speed video because that's what it is. To understand this properly, we're going to have to go back to the age of film. So to start off with, a video is basically a series of still images, known as frames, played back fast enough so to the human eye it looks like motion. Now I wanted to bring it back to those old massive film cameras. Remember these? Or even these, because it makes it easier to explain. When one frame of film passes over the shutter hole, the image seen through the lens is exposed onto the light-sensitive film. Now you may have heard of the term FPS, or frames per second. This means how many individual frames are being exposed to light in 1 second. The industry standard for videos at normal speed is either 24 or 25 frames per second. I like using 24 frames per second, so I'm going to keep that as the base for this video. If you shoot something in 24 frames per second and play it back in 24 FPS, then it looks like this. Normal playback that everyone is used to. To the human eye, anything above 10 FPS will appear as motion. If I double this to 48 frames per second, you can see that the video is smoother, because for every second shot, there are double the amount of frames, but being played back at 48 frames per second. If we went in the opposite direction and shot in 12 frames per second, the 12 frames are being stretched to fill 1 second, and so you get a ton of motion blur. Once we get our head around that, we can go on to slow motion. Slow motion is basically taking 1 second of frames and stretching them out so it takes more time to play back. As I said, if the frame rate matches the playback speed, your video is going to be in normal speed, but the only thing that will vary is the amount of motion blur. But if you shoot 48 frames but then play it back at 24 frames per second, it's going to take twice as long to showcase those frames. Hence, 1 second becomes 2 seconds. Your playback is going to be 2 times slower. The next standard is 120 frames per second, which produces footage that is 5 times slower. Then you got 240, which is easy. 240 frames per second divided by 24, that's 10, so 10 times slower. And we're going all the way up to 1000 frames per second in this video, so that's 40 times slower than real time. Now I could demonstrate the various speeds by filming a droplet falling into water, but this is JRDM. We do things a little bit differently. So here's a car smashing into some Lego bricks. Well, I hope that was as entertaining for you as it was for me. Now we need to talk about the importance of slow-mo and how and when to use it. It's no secret that most of us are carrying around smartphones that are capable of shooting slow motion, but 15 years ago, high-speed videography was a luxury. It was very expensive tech that only specialist cameras could achieve. The problem with slow-mo is that you need a lot of light. The slower you get, the less time the shutter stays open, and that means less light hitting the sensor. You can see the difference with this indoor shot. 24 FPS is as you would expect, but without ample lighting, 240 frames per second looks noticeably darker. Whether it be old film reels or newer high-end digital cameras, storing and processing the high-speed footage is costly. Because you're effectively shooting more frames, you're going to use up more film or memory, and all that data needs real-time processing. Slow motion on smartphones is relatively cheaper because the camera you're using is smaller, and the footage is usable but not top quality. Full HD or 4K slow motion cameras that can shoot upwards of 1000 frames per second cost around £130. No wait, that's £130,000. But why do people use slow motion? It's often used in action scenes to elevate the viewing experience. It allows the viewer to be submerged into what's going on by showcasing every little detail. It can make the violence and noise on screen beautiful, from a firing bullet to a drop of blood. Car chases are usually fast-paced, but sometimes slip into slow motion just briefly, but enough to give a different perspective. Slow-mo has also widely been used to highlight the effect of drugs by making it seem like you're in a time vacuum. In the 2010 movie Inception, slow motion is basically a main character, with various frame rates being used to show the different layers of a dream. Slow motion also emphasizes behavior, sometimes being used to show a character's superhuman powers such as in The Matrix or X-Men. Slow motion therefore is a very important aspect of storytelling, and when done right can be used to elevate the audience's emotions. An otherwise normal shot of a car exploding looks dreary at normal speeds, but at 120, 240, and 1000 frames per second, slow-mo adds a depth and dynamic that makes the shot more visually stunning. Now for some tips for when you're shooting slow motion on your phone. When you're shooting some action, try not staying flat against the scene. Instead, try adding some movement, such as panning or circling around to emphasize the shot. The added motion to your slow motion will bring some life to your shot. Also, try and film in some well-lit areas so that your footage does not turn out grainy or dim, or use the flash. By the way, don't worry too much about the camera shake because the final footage in slow-mo will iron the bumps out. Another fun thing to do using slow motion is if your phone has a wide-angle lens, use this to shoot sporty scenes as your shots will look amazing. And that's it for a crash course in slow motion. I hope you enjoyed this video and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on future educational videos where we can both learn about the art of filmmaking.